Big trade over the weekend. The Vikings acquiring 49ers running back Jordan Mason for a couple of picks. There's a pick swap involved, but the Vikings continuing to go out, address big needs this offseason. Well, I guess this last week in general, they have done that in very fast fashion. They have addressed a bunch of their offseason needs that we went into free agency talking about that they needed to address: the interior of the offensive line, defensive line, and running back position in general. And they've done all three of those this week. And the last one, most recent one, Jordan Mason joining the running back room with Aaron Jones. What was your reaction to this trade when it happened Saturday night? And how do you see Mason fitting in with Aaron Jones in that Vikings backfield this season?
Yeah, my reaction was that it just makes a lot of sense, and I think the more you dive into Mason's numbers from last year, the more it just continues to make sense. I mean, from a business standpoint, the fact that the Vikings were able to get a 2026 sixth round pick for Ed Ingram from the Texans, Ed Ingram being a player who was no longer in their plans, if anything, would have been kept as guard depth, but to get that pick from them and then basically turn around and I imagine it's the same pick, or at least it's in the same round that they are trading to the 49ers for Mason, and then a pick swap this year where they only move down 27 spots, go from the fifth round to the sixth round. That's really good business from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to address a need like that. And then they're giving Mason a 2-year extension, $7 million guaranteed. I think maximum value of $12 million, which is a little bit more obviously than what a running back you might draft this year would make. But he's also much less of a risk than drafting a running back, because there's always some uncertainty with rookies at any position coming into the league. Mason last year, I mean, a lot of people will remember how he stepped in for Christian McCaffrey to start the
Mm-hmm.
season, and just their offense didn't really miss a beat. He's not the same player as Christian McCaffrey. He's not the same receiving threat, but really, really efficient running the ball. Averages 5.3 yards per carry for his career. Week 2 against the Vikings, or whatever week that was, had 100 yards, a touchdown. He just runs with a really physical style. He's got great kind of contact balance. He's not devoid of the burst or explosiveness that you have to have, which is why I think as kind of a power back complement to Aaron Jones, he's more than just, if you think about previous Vikings power backs like an Alexander Madison or Latavius Murray. Mason is a more dynamic version of those players, and the stats are really impressive. I mean, you look at last year, next gen stats, rush yards over expected. It was Derrick Henry leading the way with a certain carry minimum. Derrick Henry leading the way, Saquon Barkley in second, and then Jordan Mason was those are the only two guys he was behind, and those are kind of the consensus two best running backs in football. He's in a great situation with the 49ers for sure, but this guy can really, really play, and I think is just a very smart complement to Jones, both in terms of the 1-2 punch that they could provide when they're healthy, and also if Jones happens to miss any time, he did play in all 17 games last year, but he got banged up here and there. He's 30 years old. You now have a really good insurance policy in Jordan Mason, who could step in and be a workhorse if needed.
The thing that also is important for this addition is that we know how important running games can be for rookie quarterbacks. And JJ McCarthy, assuming he is the quarterback, putting aside all the Aaron Rodgers hullabaloo, assuming JJ McCarthy is the quarterback, right? Essentially, it will be his rookie season as the starter for the Vikings. So he'll need a strong running game, and we know that's been an issue for the Vikings over the past couple of years. Now with Jordan Mason there, now with Aaron Jones returning for a second season in Minnesota, you also add in the upgrades to the interior of the offensive line. This feels like the Vikings have addressed their biggest need on offense, and that will certainly help JJ McCarthy next year kind of grow into his role as the starter for the Vikings.
Yeah, it for sure will. I think it's kind of driven Kevin O'Connell crazy that they haven't been able to put an efficient running game on the field, because he's an offensive guy. He's a passing guy for sure, coming from the Sean McVay tree, but he wants to have a really good run game and the blocking schemes that come with all of that, and the way that doing so and then marrying the run in the pass can really help your offense hum and control the time of possession and things like that. And the Vikings just haven't been able to do it. They were 30th over the last 3 years of the 3 years of the Kevin O'Connell era in EPA, expected points added per rush. And so they were a little better last year than they were over the first 2 years. But it's something that they've been trying to address. I mean, you remember they went out and they got Josh Oliver in free agency 2 years ago. That was a move to try to help the running game. They went out last year and they got Aaron Jones because they were like, all right, we need an actually good running back to do this. And they've just continued this year. They are just not messing around about trying to once and for all get into at least the top half of the league in rushing efficiency, because you bring back Aaron Jones, you go out and then you say, oh, that's not enough at running back. Let's go get Jordan Mason. You sign Will Fries, you sign Ryan Kelly. Like this on paper has all the makings of being a very good running game. There's really no reason at this point why it shouldn't be, provided that JJ McCarthy is good enough to keep
Yeah.
defenses honest through the air. But I totally agree with you that that is a huge thing for a rookie quarterback. To whatever extent possible, you don't want to put the whole offense on the shoulders of a 22-year-old who is getting his first season, we're assuming, as your starter, as your starting quarterback. So having an efficient run game, having Jones and Mason be able to complement each other. Having Jones is kind of the receiving threat and the more explosive, a slightly smaller guy. But he's worked really well in the past in Green Bay in tandem with players like Jamal Williams and AJ Dillon, who bring that more physical between the tackles, short yardage element, who also have some explosiveness. And I really, really like the Jordan Mason addition for the Vikings offense, especially in another aspect of it being they now don't need to necessarily draft a running back early this year. They still could, but all these moves we've been talking about in free agency continue to set them up to do whatever in the draft and to just kind of stick to their board and take the best player available.
Yeah, you knew the next topic on my rundown here was looking at the draft based off of everything that they've added over the last 7 days. What do we see as the biggest needs heading into next month's draft? Because it seems like all the positions that we had talked about coming into free agency of these are the biggest needs that they can kind of target in the draft, and they're deep at all those positions in this draft. They've answered all of them. They've it seems like they have done a good job of filling those needs. So where do we see their biggest needs? Do we see them sticking at their current pick, or with the way they've gone about this free agency, can they trade down maybe out of the first entirely and just accumulate picks because we know that they don't have a whole lot of picks to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, all along I've felt like they're going to trade down just because they've only got the 4 picks. You want to have more than
Yeah.
that. I don't think Kwesi Adolfo will be satisfied with having that many picks by any means. It was always just a question of, does somebody at a certain position that has a certain grade on their board fall to them at 24 who's too good to pass up, and that could certainly still happen. But when you just look at kind of the needs aspect of it heading into the draft, if there's one right now that's maybe the most obvious, it would probably be left guard, where Blake Brandel was merely okay last year. Like I think there's a real chance that they could go O line with that first pick, whether that's the Alabama guard Tyler Booker, who would just immediately plug and play and kind of fill out your offensive line, and push Brandel back into being some valuable depth. Or Gray Zabel, the guy out of North Dakota State who can play guard. He could play guard right away, and then he could also be a long term center option. I don't think Ryan Kelly is necessarily going to be the Vikings center of the future, but so that's one of them, the offensive line, and then cornerback as well is one that they still need to address. They're hosting Jeff Okuda, former top 5 pick, on a visit today. That wouldn't be. I mean, he's somewhat of a reclamation project. I think it would be a good addition, somebody to take a chance on and see if Brian Flores can help him kind of revive his career and live up to some of that potential. But they still need more cornerbacks, and then I think you could even look to like safety as being a potential option early, with Harrison Smith probably being in his last season. I mean, we've been saying that the last couple of years, but probably Harrison Smith's last season. So that would be one potential position, but the kind of overarching point is there isn't one specific position that they have to take. Like you could roll with Blake Brandel at left guard and be okay with that. You could roll with your current cornerback room if you got to add at least one more veteran, but have Byron Murphy, Mekhi Blackman, Isaiah Rogers, let's say Jeff Okuda, and you could roll with that and be okay. So you have the ability to trust your board, and whether it's a defensive back, whether it's an offensive lineman, whether it could still be a defensive tackle, given that Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave are both up there in years a little bit on the other side of 30. So they have a lot of flexibility. They could even take they could take a wide receiver, like take a total luxury pick if that's the best player there, and just try to make an unbelievable offense. Um, so there's a lot of options on the table. I will say I don't think that they will pick a running back in the first round or super high, just because like if you were to take a Caleb Johnson or a Travion Henderson or something really high, that there wouldn't be a clear path to them playing very much behind Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. So I still think they could take a running back later on, but it would surprise me if they do that early at this point.
For sure. Now, looking ahead towards the 2025 season, I know Colin Cowherd made waves last week when he said the Vikings had the worst roster in the NFC North, which is kind of preposterous in his own right, and
Yeah.
maybe kind of feels like the Sam Darnold fan in him is feeling a little bit aggrieved for Sam Darnold being shipped out essentially for nothing. But when we look at the NFC North and where the Vikings finished last year, second behind Detroit, and we look at all the moves that they've made this offseason, strengthening in areas of significant need, how do we see them fitting into the NFC North that is going to be competitive once again? You look at what the Packers did. I mean, outside of overpaying for a guard, I don't know much else. I didn't follow much else of what the Packers did. The Bears absolutely stocked up on the interior of their offensive line this offseason. The Lions added DJ Reed, who's going to be kind of their Justin Jefferson shutdown guy. So, how do we see what the rest of the NFC North did and what the Vikings did and where these teams stack up now heading into the draft season?
Yeah, the Colin Cowherd thing is funny. I think he must have just seen that Sam Darnold signed with the Seahawks and not followed a single other move that the Vikings made in free agency, because their roster, on the whole, got a lot better over the last week. Obviously, the quarterback position has an outsized importance in football and in the success of your team, but the entirety of the roster is inarguably better than it was
Mhm.
last season, with the way that they shored up their most glaring weaknesses from those final two games. So yeah, it all comes down to JJ McCarthy. Obviously, I think the Lions they've still got that entire core in place, and the proven success that they've had with Dan Campbell. I suppose they don't have the core in place in terms of the coaches, Ben
Yeah.
Johnson and Aaron Glenn, who helped them get there. I still think roster wise, they deserve to go into the season as the favorites in the NFC North. And then you would maybe say the Packers in two, just because Jordan Love has proven it to a certain degree at that position. They've got a lot of wide receivers. They've got solid defense. Honestly, off the top of my head, I can't even tell you what the biggest things that they did this offseason are either. But it's a
According to
good roster.
ESPN, it's signing Aaron Banks for 4 years,
Oh
$77
yeah, they
million.
gave Aaron Banks a lot of money, who is
Yeah.
not as good of a player as Will Fries.
They signed Nate Hobbs, the former Raiders quarterback, for 4 years, $48 million. Brought back or are signing Brandon McManus, the kicker, and then brought back Isaiah McDuffie, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's not a very inspiring offseason. I might have
No.
to actually drop. I might have to drop them on this list actually. But then I mean, the whole thing is going to be competitive. We said this going
Yeah.
into last year too. The Bears are they're still the Bears until proven otherwise. But Ben Johnson was a very good hire for them on paper. I like what they did in terms of being really aggressive to go out and fix the entirety of that interior offensive line in front of Caleb Williams. I think they've got a chance to be good, but I do think that they should be fourth in terms of how we view the hierarchy going into the season. I think the Vikings should be third at worst, and arguably second. And there's a lot of projection there with JJ McCarthy for sure. But if he's the player that they think he is, based on what they saw from the start of rookie minicamp last year to the game against the Raiders where he unfortunately injured his meniscus, um, then they've got a pretty dang good team on their hands if McCarthy is that guy, because
Yeah.
he doesn't have to have the Sam Darnold season from last year to help the Vikings win a lot of games with a better defense, a better run game, better interior offensive line. It's a very very good roster. I think what Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores have done, O'Connell the last 3 seasons, Flores the last two, it sets a pretty high floor. I mean, the fact that even in 2023 that they were able to be in it so late in the season with a lot of games started by Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall, like I think McCarthy. You hate to say a rookie has a certain floor, because they're rookies and they haven't shown it, or McCarthy's sort of rookie. But I'm pretty sure he has a higher floor than the Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins level,
Yeah.
with what he accomplished at Michigan, the tape there, being a top 10 pick. So I don't know. I think this Vikings team, I think they have a chance to be very good without necessarily getting back to 14 wins, which is just an inherently difficult thing to do in the NFL. So, yeah, I'd put them second or third in the kind of preseason NFC North standings, depending on how you feel about Green Bay.
When you look even further out, stretch us out a little bit further. NFC, excuse me, over the next 5 years, where do you see what level do you see this team competing? Because you look at the NFC, you got Philadelphia, who just came off of winning the Super Bowl with one of the deepest rosters maybe we've ever seen. Detroit have been building, and yes, they'll have to adjust with new coordinators there. So we'll see how that transition goes. Washington look absolutely incredible with Jaden Daniels, and they've stocked up around him. LA, I mean, how long does Matthew Stafford keep going? And we know Sean McVay is an incredible coach, one of the best in the league. So how long can they keep going? Seattle, what's the Sam Darnold effect there? I know they got rid of DK Metcalf. There's just a bunch of big names in the NFC that have kind of bolstered up. I mean, Atlanta could be a surprise with Michael Penix Jr. How do we see over the next 5 seasons the Vikings competing in the NFC?
Yeah, the Vikings have set themselves up very deliberately over the past 3 years of this regime to have a chance now to go into this 3, 4, 5 year time horizon, as Kwesi Adofo-Mensah would say, and compete at a very high level, compete at the top of the NFC, compete to potentially get to a Super Bowl if JJ McCarthy pans out. And that's really what it comes down to in the
Mhm.
NFL. I mean, this roster building approach of drafting a quarterback, building out the team completely around them. If they can reach a certain level, they don't have to become Patrick Mahomes. They just have to be good enough that the Vikings are going to have a chance to be very, very competitive over the next 5 years. I mean, you talk about other guys who have gone to Super Bowls on their rookie contracts, like Jared Goff did it back before he was Lions. Jared Goff, when Rams, Jared Goff was a good player who could do some good things, but he wasn't lighting up the league. But because the roster was so stacked around him, I mean, you look at like Brock Purdy, for example, is another one. The Eagles sort of did it with Carson Wentz on his rookie deal, but I mean, it was Foles who got him there. But like, if McCarthy is even in that kind of Kirk Cousins range as like the 10th to 15th best starter in the NFL, or close to that, the Vikings are going to be very, very good because of all the pieces that they have around him. So I think the Washington has an advantage in that their quarterback, we now have the year of evidence
Yeah.
that he's very good. Like, we know that Jaden Daniels is a problem for the rest of the NFC. But if the Vikings can approach that, they're going to be right there as well. And yeah, the Eagles, the Lions, those teams aren't going away. The Bears could get interesting if Caleb Williams can really take a leap under Ben Johnson. The Packers, the Falcons, like it's a really good conference. There's a lot of good teams. Um, not the same level of proven quarterback play as there is over in the AFC, where there's all those insane just superstars at that position. But the Vikings are going to be right there if if McCarthy is the guy that they believe him to be.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to track this team's development throughout the rest of the offseason and going forward. Go read Will's work over on Vikings on SI, as well as Timberwolves, Twins, and Gophers on SI as well. Hit subscribe to the YouTube channel. Does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here to the channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow, or Wednesday, excuse me, with another topic across Minnesota Sports. Talk to you then, Minnesota Sports.